Thanks for coming today, you guys. So the title of this talk is Branding Poo Poo Platter because it's only 45 minutes, and I figured this way you can just get a little sampling of everything that branding has to offer, and we can just give you an overview to think about how you might put it to use for your business. So on the menu for today, I just want to talk a little bit about today's market because it's so important to understand what's going on and what the chatter is before you just launch into saying your own thing. We're also going to talk about how to discover your own brand, what is branding, there's so many different definitions, and then also putting it all to work. So today's market, just a super quick recap, I don't even need to tell you, coronavirus, oh my God, it's all over the news. Italy's Colosseum, there's usually a bunch of people in front of it, there's nobody there. Aside from the coronavirus, Hawaii tourism and hospitality sectors are pointing up. This is great. Even if you're not in tourism or hospitality, your customers probably are if they're local. So it has a trickle-down effect. So that's a good thing. We're also seeing some really interesting trends in terms of customer sentiment right now. There's growing distrust in the media and government, not surprisingly. And also on this graph, NGOs are nonprofits, and even those guys, we don't feel like they're competent, which is kind of a bummer. And so ironically, there's this focus placed on businesses. A lot more is being asked of us to be responsible, to do the right thing, and to sort of pioneer this innovation. It's a pretty interesting time to be in in the business sector. And for a branding standpoint, what does this mean for us? People are saying, I believe brands can be a powerful force for change. Wow, when did we ask so much of Pepsi and t-shirt brands, And then also, I expect them to represent me and solve societal problems. So let's unpack this a little bit. And also, this is the broader US, and so are we finding the same thing in Hawaii? Do we think that this is something that is just a mainland thing, or is it trickling over here? Well, I do feel like with the Kukiaki Mauna movement, there's a growing distrust in local government, and there's a recognition of the sovereignty movement is getting speed, the voices are unifying. I think those are harbingers of that change being manifested here on our islands. And then also, let's look at the media. What about all the DIY and social media stuff? I feel like that's an example of us taking this into our own hands as individuals and sort of separating ourselves from the larger media. And then also it's trickling down into advertising too. So what about influencers? This is Chelsea Kauai, and she's plugging Hyundai. Are you kidding? Hyundai, that's a pretty big brand. So I do believe that locally we're seeing a growing interest as well in homegrown businesses, and customers are elevating their expectations of us. We're seeing this on Oahu. I don't know if you guys have heard of Mana Up. Pretty awesome. They're a small business startup incubator. They are just going really well. This is one of their fashion shows. And then on a super local basis, we have the Best of Kona Fest. I don't know if anyone went there, but we got way more people than we thought were going to show up, to the extent that we were worrying about the fire department and stuff. But that's great. And so there is this thirst, there's this hunger for local stuff and people doing it right. So to summarize, we're at an interesting point. Tourism indicators are up. Recent coronavirus scare is causing a sudden downturn in tourism, but I don't think that hopefully, who knows, I'm not a doctor, but I think we need to look at the bigger picture instead of just addressing that immediately. And then we have a growing distrust of government and media. It's very real. On the other hand, there's an increased faith and hope placed in businesses, and local businesses are being recognized and supported. I'd like to introduce you to, I don't know, I'm sure you know Sig Zane, but I don't know if you know his son is taking, he's pretty amazing. Even he is talking about branding and how important storytelling is, and it's just an example of the next generation picking up the torch to do business in the right way and to really try to be true to your roots, but also be modern. And this is a really cool quote. I don't know if you guys are getting a chance to read it behind me. So that is today's market. Let's talk a little bit about what branding is. I feel like that's kind of a buzzword. I remember when I first started doing it, people would say, does it hurt? Do I look like I do branding? Seriously. But it's out in the industry now and people are talking about it, but I don't feel like it's been talked about what exactly it is. So let's go there, shall we? So typically marketing has a sales funnel that is triangular, and the idea is you just like blast out your message to everybody, and as you go down the funnel, people grow less interested, and the number of people who you're speaking to and connecting to drops off. And hopefully there's a few people left over when you have repeat businesses at the bottom, and then ideally you have some brand super fans that not only repeat businesses, but they're like spreading the word about you. I like to feel like branding cuts off the wings of this because that is a pretty inefficient model in my opinion. I like to call it the branding sales tube. If we are more selective about who we're talking to at the beginning, we can say that branding helps you say the right thing to the right people at the right time in the right way. And when you do that, you don't have to, broadcast it mass market. You can be more efficient. You can get farther with a smaller budget and less energy and fewer people on your team. Key for small business. So what does this look like in practice? I wanted to look for some examples of what branding looks like, and I had a fun time digging up this old ad. So on the, let's see, that's your left. This is like the typical ad of how things used to be done, right? Well, we'll show them on the beach, we'll show some pictures, super tan people. And then on the right-hand side, we have a moment, right? A moment is captured, and you can really get the feeling of people entering the beautiful lobby when they're starting their vacation, and they're like, right? It's a little bit different, but they did their research, and I think that they really hit it on the nail there. Another example is on the left, we have the really traditional way of handling advertising. This is a local example. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's very expected, and it's unfortunately kind of easy to forget it because it looks like everything else. Whereas on the right, I love my Hawaii life. Like, I get goosebumps when I read that. It's why we live here, right? And that is a feeling. Home is a feeling. It's more than a building. And so the more that we can start to understand the conversation between the brand and the customer, the more we can create these aha moments for our customers. Studies are showing now, today, that 80% of consumers are more likely to do business with a company that offers personalized experiences. And like, yes, of course, but 80%? Like, people are just expecting a lot more than they used to. And so when we look at having a personal experience with a mass market of people, it gets very intimidating. And like, how are you able to connect with somebody when it's a crowd? Well, branding helps you think about just the people that might be already interested in what you have to say. And so it becomes more manageable. If I had to be pinned down to a definition of branding, which I decided to do for you, this would be my definition. It's based on the foundational level, what you're doing, the company's selling and everything. And then also where you fit within the market. So are you on the high-end expensive side? Are you more accessible and like every day? And then the philosophy behind the decisions that a company makes. Why do you use local ingredients, or why do you use the longer, more labor-intensive process? And it often has to do with something that's a core belief system, and that says volumes about your brand. Special sauce, what makes you unique? Maybe it's a multi-generational thing, or maybe it's some special ingredient that you don't talk about. And then the kind of relationship the customer has with you. For example, the relationship I would have with a bank is very different than a school versus broke to mouth, right? And the way in which I want these brands to talk to me would be very different. And then also, finally, who they are, their personality. So every brand does have a personality, and I'll go into that a little bit later. A few myths I'd like to dispel are your brand is not your logo. Your logo is an expression of your brand, and says who? Not just me. Seth Godin, who some would consider the forefather of branding. He's written a ton of great books, and also Harvard Business Review says so, unless perhaps you're a cow or that person that asked me at the networking group if I was gentle. And then another thing I'd like to talk about is your brand does not exist in a vacuum. What does this mean? So there's something called the brand gap. So who you are and who you are perceived to be, if they are not in alignment, that's considered a brand gap. For example, if I think I am Beyonce, but y'all don't think I'm Beyonce, I'm not Beyonce. It has to be realistic. And sometimes companies are so inwardly focused on what they're doing, they don't take the time to step out and ask the public, do a survey, do a focus group. So it's really important to understand how you're being perceived as well as who you think you are. Because even if it's true, if people don't feel the same way, then it's unfortunately not quite there. So I do have some good news. You all have a brand right now. Brands are not created, they are discovered. As you noticed in the definition, those are all things that already exist. And what our job is to do is to define it and then figure out how to express it in a way that's authentic. So it's a pretty lengthy process, but I created this crazy diagram. You can download it at this link if you would like. If you don't want to write down the link, you can just go to my website and navigate over to Services and Brand Identity. This truly maps out the brand strategy process. You can follow it from start to finish, and it is basically the process that I use and that large corporations use to define brands. So we're going to unpack it one at a time. So first off, I'm going to put stars by things that I feel need extra explanation. I don't think core services or product offering needs extra time, and we have limited time today, so I'm just going to go over the starred things. So for the foundational aspect, the company profile, I would like to talk a little bit about benefits. So we know that some of the benefits of a fast car is that it goes fast, but another benefit is that it makes you feel like a badass, right? And that is intangible. That is definitely a selling point and an intangible benefit. So when you are thinking about the part of your brand that is what your company offers, don't forget the intangible benefits. Other examples of this would include no buyer's remorse. Just like satisfaction that you got the best deal, you got a quality product. Peace of mind is something that is very, exciting for us. We want that. Also, custom tailoring can bring confidence in one's own skin. I'm wearing KK's original design today. She's doing the fashion show later, and I feel fabulous in this dress. If I had bought it at like Ross or something, I don't know if I would have as much confidence. And then high design makes people feel cutting edge. Supporting local business has like a warm and fuzzy feeling, like we feel good about the product. And then luxury items, for example, deliver a perceived elevated social status and bragging rights to friends. These are all benefits that you can't really touch, or it's difficult to put a price tag on, but they're very important. The next phase in the brand strategy process is competitive environment. So who else is on the playing field? And I think it's good to remember that if your product is something that's like innovative and new and unexpected, sometimes you think that you might not have any competition, but there's some need that your product is solving that is driving people to buy it. And you know what? Before you existed, people were doing something. Sometimes doing nothing is a competitor. People might just not understand your product, or it's too complicated, or it's too expensive, and they're just like, whatever, it's fine. I didn't used to have something like this before. You have to overcome that and recognize that it's a competitor. I start a couple things. Market positioning. So it's easier if I just give you an example. For example, coffee. So market positioning is about understanding all of the options that are available in a sector. So for example, with coffee, you could make it yourself drip at home. You could do like instant Folgers. I don't know what that yellow stuff is, but it looks disgusting. It's like instant ancient branded Italian espresso. And then on the other side of the spectrum, we have like Volcanica and coffee, tea, and leaf. And then the trendy, lower priced items, you could grow your own coffee berries and roast them. That is an option. However, I don't think we have a guy holding hand-grown coffee berries and Folgers instant coffee being like, which one do I want to do? So it's important to like map out your competitors and think about who are most similar to you. And really, instead of just like competing with everybody, just compete with those who are most closely aligned with what you offer. And so if you look at this diagram, it's a way of just, you don't have to spin your wheels with like 75% of the market. And so you can be more efficient if you just focus on those guys. Another thing I wanted to talk about was industry trends. I did a logo redesign for a doula a few years back. They are a birthing coach and they're in the women's wellness sector. And when I looked to see what women's wellness logos were out there, they were all purple, they were all swooshy, and they were like all a woman's body. And I was like, this is not gonna be hard to stand out. And we didn't even like pursue that as an option, which I think it must be something that naturally comes to mind. Otherwise there wouldn't be so many people that are doing this. And again, this is just her market. So that's just another example of what industry trends might be. So the next stage in the branding process is target audience. So who are we talking to? This goes back to that brand gap as well. It's important to understand that we're not just figuring out who we are, but there's another person sitting on the other side of the table, and it's the customer. There's a conversation happening. Every time someone comes to your website, there's a conversation, and your website is answering questions for you, whether you like it or not, and hopefully it's saying the right thing. So I start a few things. Secondary audiences, demographics, and decision-making process. So secondary audience would be somebody who, for example, if you were a jewelry maker, your primary audience would be like Nordstrom's or Maui Divers Jewelry. Perhaps you want to sell your prototype to Nordstrom's and they can mass produce it, or you want to want Maui Divers to be like a distributor. And the audience would also be the woman who's buying it and wearing it. However, a secondary audience could be her boyfriend or significant other who buys a piece of jewelry. He's not wearing it, but it's important that your marketing and stuff doesn't alienate him. For example, you know, like today we're at a women's only conference. I think Dan is like the only guy here, and Randy. So we're in like a closed bubble environment, but if we were to open the mixer to co-ed, for example, we would want to be careful about the messaging around that and just make sure that they don't feel unwelcome.
We don't, we feel good.
Good.
We're totally unguided.
I also wanted to point out that studies show we buy first with our heart, and I think once we hear this, it all rings true, and then we use our brain to justify the decision. So when we see something we want, we're like, oh yes, I want that. And then you're like, well, I could probably eat less of this, or like budget that, or I'll use it a lot, you know? And so you start to rationalize the decision. And so it's the storytelling and the feel-good factor and the intangible benefits are really important to enticing the customer and just making sure that they're happy. So the decision-making process is a nice thing to map out because the questions that pop into their brain, like say they've already decided that they want to buy your thing. Well, now their rationalizations, they have to stand up to the drilling of questions that they do to themselves. And so if your website or your product packaging or your sales pitch or whatever it is anticipates these questions and provides information that helps you stand up to that line of questioning, they're way more likely to purchase. In a way, you're helping them justify and have the information to complete the purchase. So this is just an example of like what a woman might say. I'm doing a couple workshops in the next few months. This process should map out your sitemap on your website. Like your homepage should address the top question for each of your target audience segments, and then the next level click should, you know, address the next one, and so on and so forth. Sometimes it's not necessarily words. It could be a feeling like, is this a family-friendly business? And you could solve that with a photograph. Or, you know, is their heart in the right place? And you could solve it with like an eco seal or something like that. And sometimes you write it out. But this is, I think, really huge to helping us understand how to talk about our businesses. The next aspect in the brand strategy process is personality. This to me is the most fun. If the brand were a person, what would their personality be like? And I think sometimes we think that a brand doesn't have a personality. Maybe they're a plumber or something that feels utilitarian, but not having a personality is a personality. Can a bottle tell a story? And if so, this story is boring to me. So what would the opposite of that be? How about ocean vodka? Yes, it's so beautiful. They went through this repackaging. It just feels like a bottle floating in the ocean. And even on their blog, they talk about journeying back in time with Hawaiian demigods to venture into the depth of the sea to discover the secrets. Do you think that Saveda Vodka is writing anything like that? No. In fact, you probably don't even remember the name of the last vodka. So brands can definitely have personalities. I have some more examples for you. Can a cracker have a personality? I would say that One Ton Chips has way more personality than Diamond Crackers, probably. How about a convenience store? ABC stores, not so much. I love the chicken shaka. He makes me so happy. Yes, I'm expanding horizons.
It's all about chicken.
Right?
It's all about chicken.
So good. Like, I want to meet the people that designed that. They probably eat a lot of chicken. I worked with another brand that is a beer that has chili pepper in it. And talk about something that's not for everybody, right? But we did a good job, or I think that they did a good job of identifying like that they have a niche, right? It's like people who just kind of like to torture themselves a little bit, but like beer too. And I feel like, right? I feel like we all know somebody who like loves hot sauce. You're just like, why? Could you really be enjoying yourself? Maybe you're in this room, who knows? Maybe these will resonate with you. So I have some examples. I did the copywriting for these, but not the design. Tastes better than a Molotov cocktail. As if you needed more hair on your chest. And why floss when you can burn the plaque off? So there's so much personality in these, and like a lot of people will not resonate with this, but the right people will. And then, I don't know, I'm probably dating myself here, but if you guys remember the Mac and PC guys that have the personalities, such a good example. So if you ever have a problem thinking about what's my personality, you can think of this. Like if it was a conversation with a brand that didn't have a personality, what would that look like? And I know this is a lot, and it sounds kind of woo-woo and a little bit crazy, and I have been called a brand therapist by more than one client before, but I do want to reassure you that it is founded in psychology and also leadership studies and like sound business practice. There's this amazing TED Talk by Simon Sinek, How Great Leaders Inspire Action, and he talks about, it's really great. It like changed how I looked at persuasion and like making the case for stuff. He talks about how the easiest way to communicate about what you're doing is to say what you're doing. We make sneakers. That's what we do. And then you could talk about how you do it. Oh, we use like high-tech fabric, we use lightweight structure, we have like really strong laces, and like that's interesting, but you're not really getting to connection with people until you talk about the why. And I have an example later, I'm skipping ahead, but what I'm talking about is Nike and how their tagline is just do it. It has nothing to do with shoes. Like I feel like a lot of times people think that their tagline has to say what they do, but really it's more important that it jumps into a conversation with the customer and starts to like understand them. So anyways, I'll get into it later. This talk is amazing. That segues nicely into the last aspect of brand strategy, which is the big idea. So you have all of this stuff. How do we pull it together, and how do we apply it to messaging? So for example, going back to Nike, if you wanted to talk about their value proposition, they could say, we are sports equipment for the gutsy athlete. That's true, right? Even their tagline is kind of like that. But if you wanted to dig deeper and just sort of ignore everybody that you're not talking to and really just like hone in on that feeling of being an athlete and challenging yourself every day, you could have a billboard that says, yesterday you said tomorrow. Talk about just getting in your head, right? Like, in fact, myself, I was going to work out yesterday, and I'm like, no, I have to prepare for my speech. But it's sort of like a mystery, right? And it doesn't talk to everybody. Okay, so another example of pushing something a little bit further is that same doula. She came to me and said, I really love Art Nouveau. I like mint and red, and I think flowers are great. Can you just make an Art Nouveau flower logo for me? And I said, yes, but let's just try to dig a little bit deeper here. And so what we came up with is these poppies that are showing like the seed of life and fertility. And, sometimes doulas have to unfortunately deal with unsuccessful births or people going through menopause as well. And so it's about the feminine birth cycle. But it's subtle, right? It's not beating you over the head about it. So this is an example of how you can take brand insight and take a logo to like a more personal level. Another example of what this might look like is this client in Compass. He's an artist, and he was making art prints and t-shirts and apparel line, but he had a very mixed heritage background, and he's in Oakland, California, and really wanted to use art as a way to like unify people. And he was inspired by graffiti, which is modern, very modern, right? He loved like ancient European symbols of like alchemy and like the secret societies and stuff like that. And then he was of European descent, but also Japanese, and so he had a lot of inspiration from that as well. So I came up with a logo design that could be modern or it could be ancient, and the E is sort of looked like an alchemical symbol, and it's the E of encompass. I did not pick the name spelling, and I encouraged him against this for SEO because it's a nightmare, but he really liked to be unconventional, and like the US could be us, all of us. And so I think I didn't explain this thing here. I don't know if you can see my mouse. It's like a hanko stamp. In Japanese culture, traditionally it's like their signature, and it's like really expensive, and some special people, it's like Harry Potter style. There's like this huge library of them, and you have to like go get them carved, and then you would stamp that would be like your signature on something, and artists use it. And so he really wanted to get one made with the logo. I don't know if he did, but that would be cool. Another way you can use brand strategy to inform stuff For example, a color palette. This is for a company that really identified with the Pacific Northwest. So, for example, these colors are a little bit muted and more subtle than we might use here. We might use something more vibrant and upbeat and punchy, but they're the land of like rain and evergreen forests. This felt really appropriate. Another example would be you could incorporate dual meanings. The founders of this company, Distill Research, there was like 5 of them, and they didn't have a lot in common, but they all really loved whiskey. And every time they had a meeting, they would often someone would bring a new bottle of whiskey that they would find. I don't know how you would get anything done, but it's a bunch of dudes. And so I really enjoyed doing a bunch of research on like, okay, let's look at whiskey. I was like looking at the molecular construct of it, and maybe there's a history or something. And I found that whiskey stills have to use this particular shape of beaker that's called a retort, which to me is hilarious because it's kind of like a retort is also a response. And they do market research, and so they're all about taking a lot of data and distilling it into just what you need. And so we were able to use something that looks kind of like an asterisk, or like a quotation mark. It looks kind of like a speech bubble, but it also looks just enough like the whiskey still. And so on their site is no longer live, unfortunately. They fell apart. But
the whiskey.
maybe, I don't know. They're not listening, hopefully. They're really awesome gentlemen. But there's this animation where it would like boil and trickle and go through the thing and then fill up the logo on their homepage, which was really fun. And so, okay, so what's the big idea? What's your brand story? Again, we'll go back to this crazy chart, and as you go through it, you can hopefully you remember my explanation of some of this stuff that's a little bit confusing. You will be writing out this stuff, and it's in an order for a reason, because it starts with the most basic stuff and then it gets a little bit more like obtuse and like woo-woo as you go on. And hopefully by the end, by the time you get to the big idea, you're noticing some patterns, and maybe you're having, your brain's been like trickling on this for a while, and maybe you'll think of an archetype or a myth or something like that, or like the whiskey retort, something might pop up. And I do want to encourage you, though, not to rebrand. I do feel like rebranding is a myth. We all have brand equity, and whether you like it or not, the history and the legacy, reputation that you carry with you, it probably shouldn't just be thrown out with the bathwater. You can evolve it, like you can refresh it, and that can also sometimes look quite different, but you don't want to just forget all that you are, because you worked so hard to get to where you are as a company or as an individual. And just some examples to reassure you that this is possible. We can look at John Deere. 1876, I didn't even know they had like motors back then. Must have, I don't know, we'll stop talking about that, but they've been around for a long time. And it still looks similar, right? Like it looks modern, but the colors are there, and there's still the runs like a deer. Starbucks, right? Definitely. I feel like they keep zooming in on her closer and closer. I feel like I've seen stuff now where it's just her like forehead and some eyeballs. I'm not wrong, right? Okay. I did a rebrand for the City Club of Portland. It's a 100-year-old institution that they promote like civic discourse, and they host like debates and stuff, only in Portland, right? Oregon. And they're kind of being criticized for being like just a room full of really elderly white men, and that had changed over the years. They had become more diverse. There was more young people, and there was more women involved, and so they wanted to completely throw out their logo, but they've been around for 100 years, so we tried to keep aspects of it. And in particular, you see that the City Club of Portland the font is just a little bit like the old one, right? And we still have a circular motif, and the new icon represents how blue and orange are opposite on the color wheel, and so they honor opposing viewpoints like conservative versus liberal, and it almost feels like a forum or like a debate forum, and it's also information broadcasting, right? So it's definitely a more modern take on the logo, but if you put them near each other, they don't feel like they weren't related at some point. How about Lamb? I helped Lamb redesign their logo, And talk about an organization that has changed so dramatically. We all heard Aisha's speech this morning. However, the collaboration and the sentiment of it is still there, and that girl loves gold. God bless her. So we kept the gold, and the dichotomy, but the play between cursive something and like a really stark modern font. And so we have a sort of a handmade. I was thinking it kind of looks like lipstick on a mirror or something. Oh, right, and then we did the kiss for the t-shirts and stuff. Anyway, so that's another example. Okay, so how do we put the brand to use? So we went through this process and we have ideas and we want to apply them. There's a few ways that the industry likes to document these. I guess I didn't really talk about myself, but I've been doing this for 10 years and I get hired by large agencies sometimes to outsource branding in particular. It's not very lucrative to keep somebody like me on staff because it's often needed at the beginning of a project or the start of a company or the start of a campaign, and then the need is only sporadic after that, so I get brought in as an expert sometimes. And then I also love to work with startups because you all put so much heart in it, and I'm an entrepreneur too, and it's just so much nicer to sit down with the owner of the company and just like spitball something. So these are some ways that other agencies and companies record the brand process. So a brand brief would be basically like just go through the process that I gave you and like jot down ideas and like type it into one page. Usually a brand brief is 1 to 2 pages. You could also do a target audience profile, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So that is digging deep into who your audience is. And this is so wonderful because like as if you're reading a book, it's like you're finally getting a description of who that character is, and they're painting the picture of who this person is. And so the next time they speak in the book, you can imagine the nuances and how their body language might be and what their viewpoint might be. So the more we paint a vivid picture of our customer, the more we have an easier time connecting with them. A brand vocabulary map. This is like you take the core values of the company and put synonyms around them, and it's really great for copywriting, social media, so you can talk about the brand repeatedly again and again without sounding like you're saying the same thing over and over. I'll show you an example of that in a moment. And then often a brand story book, which is it's like storytelling. It's imagery and short headline phrases that sort of evoke a feeling more than anything. And I like to call this like a creative director in a book. So if you were a smaller company and you wanted to launch a new product line, you might hire somebody like me to put together a brand storybook, and then we don't have to work together for a while, and you can hire like designers or a web developer or maybe junior people or your own staff, and you give them the book. They all get this feeling painted in their mind, and so it's an easy way of making things be consistent and on brand, sort of like there to inspire your creative team without a human. So these are just some examples. Target audience profile, don't forget it doesn't have to be a list. You could get creative. You could do a collage, a cartoon, or a character description for a movie, or how about a Tinder profile or something from social? Target audience profile could be verbal or it could be visual. I tend to be a more visual person. This is hilarious. I really hope you guys download this. I made a tiny URL for it. It's from Vanity Fair from a few years ago. It goes through each of the like millennials and Gen X and stuff like that, and it asks questions and then it answers them as if it's those people. And it starts out very like sort of dry and to the point. And by the end, I can't help but laugh outside every time. It's like, what did this generation contribute? And Gen X is like artisanal pickles. It's so funny. It's so true. So it's a good example of how you can have fun with target audience. So it's tinyurl.com/generation-gaps, and you can ask me later if you want it again. Here's an example of a keyword map. So you would take the core values of the company, and then you can just sort of brainstorm synonyms on all sides. It's really nice if you hire like a junior person to do social media on your behalf and you're a little bit concerned about how they're going to be talking about you. This can be like a nice way of giving them input without telling them what to do, or just for yourself as well. Some examples of brand storybooks. This was for Sashi. They're a high-end sushi restaurant in Manhattan Beach. They used this in the private placement memorandum to get investors and was very successful because it helped the investors envision what they were investing in before it existed. Also, Mastro's Steakhouse, they're not exactly a franchise, but they have locations all over the mainland US. And it's important that they feel the same, but they don't want to clip the wings of the people that are starting the businesses. So we did a brand storybook for them. So once you have these documents, you suddenly have a brand strategist on staff 24/7, right? You can have your brand book and your target audience, take them to the meetings with you. You can design a logo that's memorable and reflects your brand personality. I did this for Green Card Salsa. This guy was not even 21 yet, and he was starting a salsa company. And he did really well. He was in Whole Foods. I really miss eating his salsa. You can craft an authentic and engaging social media calendar. This is Puna chocolate. You can capture the imagination of the customer and stand out at the point of sale. This is the old bottle of Ocean vodka. How much better is it? My goodness. You can attract sponsors, right? They want to be a part of something that they can believe in, and by telling a story, it's easier to believe in something. You already know what brand of cookie this is, right? So branding will help you carry the story throughout the shopping experience. Look at all those mint and chocolate colors, and just how I feel like you see those colors and you know it, almost like Tiffany's or something. I have some resources for you real quick. I'm probably pushing my limits on time. I know a lot of this stuff is more than what we need on this island and as entrepreneurs, so I've started a project where I'm breaking down this stuff to just to be more bite-sized, kind of like this talk. I really believe that giving back to the community is fun and also necessary. We're all on this island together. We're all women. So this is my attempt to bridge that gap. I'm calling it Hustle with Aloha. It's hustlewithaloha.com. So I'm going to be putting workshops and videos, and that's why there's like 8,000 cameras pointed at me. And I'll be doing new events as well. So you could also continue with some help. What that might look like is the person that you would talk with, myself, another brand professional. You would start a conversation. They would put together a plan and estimate for you, and you would revise it if needed until it fit your budget and needs. And then you would discuss the next steps and sign it. So it's not like shopping in a store. It's really important that you work with the person so that they understand what you need and what your budget is. And then just to give you some ideas of services related to branding, to be a brand book to inform in-house or out-of-house contracted designers, a logo design, a website, market research to understand your target audience. Maybe you need a go-to-market or product launch strategy, or you could sell your vision to investors. I have some website workshop series after this, so I have a couple of additional events. Giving you a little lamb love. We have a big fat discount. One is single page and POW. It's like a single page website, which you're probably familiar with, where you click on the navigation and it just scrolls to the anchor point. This one, it's two-part. One is to map out the content. You know what, I'm not gonna describe it because we don't have any time, but they're on my website. The first one is for people who don't have a website yet, and then the second workshop is for people who have a website already and want to optimize it. And I did them in two parts. So if you want to, basically the first one's like a prerequisite for the second one. And so it allows you to piecemeal a little bit if you want to just do one versus the other. The top one is really labor intensive, so it's quite pricey, but it's 60% off if you guys want to pre-register today. And then the other one is 35% off. So the ultimate goal here, a strong brand strategy. Let's not be these guys. Let's be a brand that people can believe in. I want to see your logo sticker on their water bottle. We want people to be huge fans. I love that cartoon. And mahalo so much for your time and attention.